Mark Thurston, it is great to have you on Let's Talk Decarbonisation. You are the Chief Executive at HS2. I'd like to start by just asking you, in your own words, to describe HS2 and what the essential thrust of the project is. What is it about?
Hi Matthew. So HS2 is a new high-speed mass transit railway. It will transform our, not just our railway system, I think it will transform our transport system, and we'll come on to the sort of decarbonising elements of that, but we'll effectively connect the West Midlands to Manchester in the northwest and London in the south, and we'll be able to move hundreds of thousands of people around the country at speed when the network's fully commissioned. And certainly when you look at those countries who have invested in high-speed rail between their major sort of dense conurbations, it's transformed the economies in and around those areas, and certainly we're seeing that growth now through the connectivity that will come to Birmingham and in the fullness of time into Manchester. So yes, it's important for reducing carbon. It's important for connecting our major cities. And of course, a new railway, because HS2 will be effectively the backbone of our national railway system. It will put massive capacity into our existing network as well. So if you're travelling north to south from London through the Midlands and to the north, HS2 will allow all that high-speed traffic to go on a dedicated line, which means the existing lines will get much more capacity, and of course put more freight trains on those existing lines as well, which is important for decarbonising transport. So that's in its essence what HS2 is about.
You're a big figure in business. Explain to those watching how it's possible to care about the environment, to care about decarbonising our economy and specifically here transport at the same time as making money.
We're a public funded project with a huge supply chain now established, some 30,000 people around the country working on this project. Transport is the biggest generator of carbon in the UK economy, more than our energy system, mostly driven by domestic air travel and cars and lorries on our roads. And those countries around the world who are investing in high-speed train travel have seen a significant reduction in carbon. Even if you look at the impact of High Speed 1 and the route between, not far from here where I'm sat today in London Euston, you can go to St Pancras to France, and that route has taken anywhere between 40 and 60% off of the sort of carbon measure of getting between London and Paris just through using train travel, using a clean electricity system than previously would have been, whether it's people driving or flying. So sitting the cost of big infrastructure alongside this decarbonisation agenda is an important part of what HS2 is about.
And from a personal perspective, explain to us why doing your bit, and it's quite a big bit, for the environment matters to you. Why your sector matters, why being involved in something that you believe can help towards decarbonisation, why that particularly matters to you as a person.
Well, it's interesting. We've done a lot of work around sort of carbon literacy and carbon awareness at HS2, trained countries around the world who are increasingly seeing the investment in high-speed trains as a way of taking and reducing particularly sort of regional air travel. So I've become much more sort of literate in understanding this subject. I've got two daughters in their 20s, and certainly it's a generation younger than me, and many of our young people who join us here at HS2, whether it's our apprentices, our graduates, and all our young professionals. This has become an in social consciousness, this has become an increasing issue for us, of course, in not just the UK economy, but globally, the way our weather's changing, the way our climate impacts are being affected by carbon. And so it's one of those things I don't think any of us can sort of hide from. It's become more apparent to us at HS2 that's an important part of why this is an important project for the country. And when you sort of reconcile what I do and what we do here at HS2 professionally, and then you have that conversation around the dinner table with your kids who really care about this stuff, because frankly, they're going to be around a lot longer than I am, then it starts to really sort of chime with you how there's this convergence of a sort of personal and professional sort of imperative to make HS2 a success in making this contribution to decarbonising, not just our transport system, but our economy more broadly.
And how important is it to collaborate effectively with other sectors, with other areas of industry, to make sure that you are decarbonising? So I'm thinking, for example, of construction, I'm thinking of energy.
Yeah, so let's just take construction. So clearly, to build this railway, we will need huge amounts of steel and concrete. The built environment itself and construction as a sector is a significant emitter of carbon for reasons your viewers will understand. So we're doing a lot of work inside the HS2 family, but with the wider industry. So whether that's in low cementitious products, whether that's how we design the assets we're building, the way in which we construct those assets using diesel-free plant, for example, or battery-operated plant. So work we're doing at HS2 to reduce our carbon footprint, not just in the final railway, but in the way we build that railway, has long-term legacy benefits. And to your point around collaboration, it's important we work with the wider construction sector so that they benefit from a lot of the innovations and the investment we're making at HS2, because ultimately that wider construction arena will see the value of what we're doing here. And because a project of the size and scale and longevity of HS2, you've got the opportunity to invest in different techniques, whether it's in plant, technology or otherwise. So there's one level of collaboration there with the construction sector. The energy sector, I think that's probably a less defined level of collaboration for us. But our presumption is, as the government continues to invest in green energy, whether it's sustainable energy in this country, whether that's through wind or other measures, then certainly our expectation is, working with the power and energy sector, is to use effectively a green source to power this railway, so that when we open the railway in the 2030s, you're talking about sort of a net zero way of moving around masses of people around the country, which is a massive shift from where we are today. So, that collaboration between HS2 is an important part of the construction sector today, but actually we're building a railway for our future transport system, but actually working with energy and others is all part of the mix.
And give us further examples of what you're doing to ensure, as best you can, that habitats in this country are preserved or replaced. So, for example, projects that you might have to encourage the planting of trees, the mass planting of trees, the restoration of forests. Almost inevitably, perhaps, when you're building a big line like this, you're going to have to knock down some stuff in order to move forward. Give us a sense of what you're doing to offset that and to reassure those who are concerned.
As has been agreed, the route of the railway, should I say, has been agreed to be in the ground or in tunnels underground. And that's pretty much because how it was agreed in Parliament was to mitigate that impact on the natural environment. But inevitably, that's not exclusive. So some great examples, for example, at Long Itchington, where we're building really, and the second of the two tunnel drives is well on its way, a tunnel drive of just over a mile to protect an ancient woodland there. But nevertheless, there are some ancient woodlands and some areas of the natural environment that are impacted by the construction. But we take the responsibility to leave a legacy more powerful than what we're impacting. So we've got a project, what we call the Green Corridor. We've committed to plant some 7 million trees and bushes right along the route. And we're somewhere today, when you think that the railway won't open until the sort of early 2030s. So 9-10 years out, we've been on a planting program now already. So you've got a mature green corridor alongside the railway. And I think today we're somewhere around 870,000 trees and bushes planted. We'll have our sort of millionth tree moment coming towards us, I suspect, later this year. A lot of the habitats that we're impacting, we're moving. So a lot of work to move the biodiversity from sites, translocate those, whether it's species, fauna and flora. So there's a huge program, and frankly, HS2 probably as seen as a railway project and an infrastructure project, but actually it's the biggest environmental project we've ever taken on in the UK. And certainly, we're very proud of the work we've done so far, but there's more that we still need to do. In the Act, we have this commitment for no net loss of biodiversity. So we're measuring the impact we're having, and in the further northern sections, and certainly the section between Crewe and Manchester, our expectation is to have a biodiversity net gain. So we'll actually leave a more positive impact on the biodiversity and natural environment that will be impacted by the construction. So, it's early days. We're well on the way. We've got a sort of trajectory there. We've issued our first environment sustainability report. We've issued the first of those already and set out our credentials and really our prospectus in this space. So it's an important part of the conversation that we have, with the regulators, the Environment Agency, Natural England, who are sort of keeping us honest and making sure we're staying within, the sort of regulatory framework for the environment. But actually, what HS2, in many respects, for big infrastructure, is leading the way in how you reconcile, all the concrete and steel to build a railway with making sure we need the natural environment behind us in a way that's as good, if not more positive, than how we found it.
And spell out to us in very simple terms, in big picture terms, your commitment to net zero, to reaching net zero for HS2.
Yeah, well, that's a public commitment we've made. We've got a short-term commitment for the company. So as an operating entity, like a lot of businesses around the UK now, they're making commitments to be a net zero operation. And we've committed HS2 Limited, the company I run, to be net zero by 2025. And we're making good strides there. And then, frankly, when the railway opens by 2035, certainly, after the railway's open, we've committed publicly for the railway to be a net zero operation. So in operations, the railway will be a net zero transport system between the West Midlands and London.
At its base level, HS2 is kind of about taking people out of the air, taking people out of their private cars. People like me, for example, who might be tempted to drive up north or drive around the country, getting us into train carriages so that you are helping people like me, helping citizens to reduce our carbon footprint.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting when you look around the world what's going on in this regard. So train travel, certainly long distance train travel in the US has never been particularly popular as we'd know here in the UK. You move around the States because it's such a big place by plane, but actually you've got high-speed rail projects now in California and in Texas where they're seeing not just the mass transit benefits of that, but the carbon credentials of that. And in France now, interestingly, if you want to travel, I think it's less than 2 hours, Air France won't sell you a plane ticket to move around the country. They insist on selling you effectively a TGV high-speed train ticket. So you're seeing this shift, and in Spain, for example, between Barcelona and Madrid, where once upon a time the only way to get between those two major cities of Spain was to fly. Virtually now, no one would fly. You'd get there's a high-speed train system as there is from Madrid to the south, and again, there's similar stories in Italy. So the HS2 for the UK, the spine that I referred to earlier that will connect the Midlands to the north and the south, will be an important part of getting people onto the trains. And of course, what we're seeing post-COVID is train use almost getting back to pre-COVID levels, certainly the weekends. Midweek, I think it's somewhere around 80%, so 85%. And clearly working habits have changes, but we have to remember with HS2, this is a long-term investment for future generations. This rail will be here for over 100 years. That's certainly what we're designing it for. And of course, we've used our Victorian federal railway infrastructure has served us very well. We've not built a new railway north of London since Victorian times. So as much as, despite all the challenges the economy's got just now, and there's HS2 will always divide opinion on whether it's the right project for the country. The reality is, in the long run, it will be crucial to that decarbonising agenda. And certainly we're not alone in investing in high-speed train travel between our major dense populations.
You mentioned the impact of sitting around the table with your daughters has had on you. And clearly you're aware on a national and international level of the pressures to decarbonise. Do you get a sense from rubbing shoulders with other big players in industry, particularly transport, that the penny is starting to drop with people?
Yes, I do actually. I do. And both, but so at a personal level, my girls will make choices about how they travel based on the impact on the environment. I think you've seen Network Rail run quite a big campaign towards the back end of last year about how train travel is the greenest way of getting around the country. Clearly, cycling, walking's fine, and electric cars, you're seeing data that says electric car sales are on the up, so that's positive. So I think there's lots of indicators in society that this is becoming much more in the social consciousness. Of course, as I've said earlier, lots of businesses are committing to run their operations. Many of our suppliers in the HS2 supply chain, consultants and contractors, have got quite bold targets to make the way they run their companies to net zero, because frankly, they can't work for a client like us and sort of help us support our endeavour to become net zero if they're not doing it to themselves. And you're seeing many organisations finding ways of taking carbon out of their day-to-day operation. So, but I think there's some way to go, and I think the last two COP conferences, particularly one in Glasgow, has sort of brought it nearer to home. But it's a long play. I think the sort of big macro question is it happening fast enough? And is the pace of investment in green energy, green infrastructure, solutions to decarbonise our economy, not just transport? This is going to take, I think, some generations, but we all know the clock's ticking, and certainly HS2 is very aware of us making sure we play our part in that.
And give us a sense, Mark, of what it's like being in your shoes, running such a massive enterprise as HS2, liaising with politicians, liaising with stakeholders, liaising with other members of industry, dealing with criticism, dealing with an issue that, as you've said, can divide opinion. How do you, as one person, how do you manage all of that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Matthew, and I get asked that from time to time by people like you. I mean, a number of answers, and I'll try and do that justice quite quickly on today's discussion. But certainly it's been a sort of personal journey in resilience and learning to sort of be selective about what you worry about and where you put your time. Of course, to your point, there's many things I could deploy my personal time in. So and I've not been a CEO before, and certainly of an organisation as big and as complex as ours. So it's been a pretty sort of robust learning curve in working out how you not just deploy your time when you're at work, but actually, to the earlier conversation, make sure you maintain a good work-life balance. There's no point me trying to work 27 hours a day and not being a particularly good, whether it's father, husband, or whatever else might be. So we've done a lot of work in HS2 to try and sort of be our best selves. It's a very difficult, challenging project at times, to your point. And the way we're going to do that is if we look after ourselves, invest in our health and well-being. So we've got a workforce of sort of 30,000, and many of those are in orange every day in much higher riskier environments than I'm in. And of course, I've put a great team around me. I've got a very supportive board. And the longer you're in a job, like anything, I think it becomes more natural, more intuitive. In the early days, frankly, it was pretty taxing, but you sort of go through that early orientation phase, work out where you need to deploy your energy, and then you sort of set yourself up accordingly. But of course, with HS2, because of what it is, we don't ever seem to really hit calm water. We had, the Oakavy review, which was the right thing for the government to do and review the project in 2019. We sort of came through that, got the green light to proceed. Pandemic, new set of challenges for the project inside something the whole country had to suffer with. And of course now, this year in particular, in the last year, we're all in dealing with an energy crisis and the inflationary effects that's having. So we've become collectively quite resilient and quite adaptable at HS2. But what we've never lost sight of is this mission to ultimately deliver this best railway in the best way, stay true to the values of the organisation. And we've made good progress, and we've got great momentum. And that momentum, my experience on these big projects, is crucial because the thing almost has a life of itself. And my job is to make sure I just sort of keep a view on all the moving parts on any given day, of which, as you said earlier, there are several.
I just want to finish by asking you, Mark, for your message, your decarbonising message to other business leaders, to politicians, to people like me, to people watching, to people who aren't necessarily in business but who want to do their bit and want to grasp from someone in such a position of leadership, authority as yourself, want to get a sense from you of just why this really, really matters.
Yeah, it matters because we've got no choice. And in the way that we, as a business, we care about our employees, we care about our shareholders, we may care about our profits, not in my case a public entity, but as a commercial business, you care about your customers. We need to care about our carbon footprint, and we need to see that as a currency that we cover and we measure and we perform against it in sort of equal measure with all those other things, is why we choose to exist as a business. And we've certainly made good strides in that regard in HS2. It's very much part of increasingly our culture. At HS2, we've even got an employee network just focused on green, where we've got a whole series of people around the organisation who, in their sort of discretionary time, lunch times, where it might be, spend time together over and above their day job, really investing in this subject. So I think my message to business leaders, you cannot ignore this issue. And I think the sooner that enterprises, public and private, and in the third sector, embrace this as an important part of who they are and what they stand for, then I think it's going to make it much easier for policymakers to drive policy in the right direction. But policymakers alone won't be able to sort of move the needle on this. The whole sort of ecosystem of business in the UK is going to have to embrace this as an important agenda item for us in the next 5 to 10 years.
Mark Thurston, CEO of HS2, thank you so much for talking decarbonisation.
Thanks, Matthew.